Welcome to this explainer of Chapter 168. Today, we are unpacking the culminating test of a massive 7-shadow narrative arc. And honestly, this final threat is arguably the most terrifying of them all. Why? Because it doesn't burn with passion. No, it freezes the soul with the illusion of absolute futility. We're going to break down exactly how humanity is tempted to just abandon the heavy burden of choice, and more importantly, how that total moral inertia is rigorously conquered.
Here's our roadmap for today. We'll be moving through 5 distinct phases: the deceleration of Lethe, the 3 anchors of collapse, the calculus of moral inertia, reclaiming the core ignition, and finally, the master matrix summary. Let's get right into it. Chapter 1, the deceleration of Lethe, a systemic freeze.
Now, when we hear the word sloth, right, we usually just picture physical laziness, sitting around doing nothing. But this text elevates the concept to something far, far more dangerous. It redefines sloth not as a lack of movement, but as an absolute spiritual indifference, a systemic deceleration of the soul itself. It's that chilling, conscious decision that striving is just pointless, the ultimate surrender.
Picture this: a once vibrant mountain metropolis, Lethe. It's the intellectual heart of the empire, filled with sprawling libraries and towering geothermal engines. Now imagine it just slowly grinding to a halt. The citizens here, the master scholars, they didn't turn to active evil or malice. They didn't rebel. Instead, they succumbed to a vacuum of motivation. They collectively decided to just give up, and in doing so, allowed their critical, life-sustaining infrastructure to literally freeze over. The threat wasn't fire. It was a quiet, gray frost. Which brings us to Chapter 2, the 3 anchors of collapse, the vectors of decay.
Let's take a closer look at the specific individuals responsible for this operational shutdown. What is truly fascinating here is the structured perversion of logic. Administrative, philosophical, and mechanical efficiency were all weaponized to create a state of total paralysis. We have High Archon Varus representing administration, Master Philosopher Olin handling philosophy, and Chief Engineer Martha in charge of engineering.
Each of these leaders brilliantly and tragically rationalized their systemic surrender. It proves that moral decay absolutely loves to mask itself as logical optimization. For instance, Varus believed that since all empires eventually return to dust anyway, cosmic futility is absolute. So he just let vital public welfare petitions literally crumble on his administrative desk. Then you have Olin, who actively sedated the youth. He taught them the covenant of the void, essentially lecturing that all human striving is mathematically irrelevant. And perhaps most chillingly of all, Martha cooled the city's geothermal core down to absolute zero specifically to avoid friction and mechanical wear. She intentionally chose sterile preservation over life-sustaining warmth. Chapter 3, the calculus of moral inertia, the mathematical proof of collapse. All right, let's dive into this. We are looking at Ilian Mar's exact equation, which mathematically proves that spiritual stagnation is an active collapse, not just a peaceful rest. Let's break down the calculus here. On the top, the numerator, we have psi and tempt multiplied by delta E action. That represents our conscious intention multiplied by our active expenditure of energy. But look at the bottom, the denominator, delta indifference plus epsilon times t. Mar is proving that as the coefficient of indifference expands over time, as it approaches infinity, the entire value of our moral vitality collapses to zero. It's a mathematically rigid proof that when internal consciousness drops to absolute zero, it is not peace, it is a living death masquerading as sterile perfection. To counter this terrifying state of living death, Vassago introduces the index of spiritual vitality. We have to contrast Mars' proof of existential collapse directly with this index. The core takeaway is simple but profoundly uncompromising. Human life cannot be preserved by eliminating friction. Think about it. Sterile perfection is death. The value of life is found in continuous friction, in exhaustive purpose, in kinetic action over time. To live, truly live, is to experience friction. Moving to Chapter 4, Reclaiming the Core Ignition, the Rejection of the Void.
So how does human agency respond to this stark mathematical reality? Deep within the subterranean vaults, the turning point arrives. Alien Mar confronts Archon Varus and completely shatters his illusion of cosmic futility. Varus tries to justify his inaction by pointing to the infinite eventual decay of the cosmos, but Mar anchors him violently back to the present. He reminds Varus that the immediate suffering of the people freezing in Lethe today is undeniably real. You cannot excuse present tragedy by pointing to the infinity of the future. That realization is the very first crack in the ice.
Then, the focus shifts to Martha. Down in those vaults, Vassago appeals directly to her brilliant engineering mind. He makes her see the truth. A machine kept at absolute zero just to avoid wear and tear isn't a machine anymore. It's a tomb. Reclaiming her free will against the void, Martha makes a definitive physical choice. She violently slams the primary ignition levers forward. The geothermal core roars back to life. Superheated steam shatters the ice crystals, and she intentionally chooses the exhausting, messy labor of life over the sterile perfection of the void. She physically and morally thaws the city.
Finally, Chapter 5, the Master Matrix Summary, the Eternal Vigil.
Now, what's really fascinating here is the Council's comprehensive archival matrix. Etched directly into obsidian, this chart unifies all 7 conquered sins from chapters 162 right up to 168, alongside their mortal anchors, the applied calculi, and the virtues extracted from them. For this final shadow of sloth, anchored by Varus, Olin, and Martha, challenged by the calculus of moral inertia, the ultimate conquered virtue yielded was spiritual vitality and action. It's a complete, permanent record of human resilience. And then we have Belial. Observing all of this from his throne of cold ash, Belial recedes into the deep dark with a profound realization. He realizes that these existential threats, these massive temptations, were not just punishments. They were the very instruments required to forge humanity. As he says, temptation was merely the anvil upon which human virtue was forged. Without the anvil, the steel of human resilience could literally never be shaped. Which brings us to the ultimate thesis of this explainer, and it is completely unyielding. Freedom is not a static prize. You can't achieve it and simply rest. The natural inertia of the universe trends toward entropy, toward silence, toward absolute zero. So spiritual survival demands a continuous, active, and daily conscious expenditure of kinetic energy against that natural decay. I want to leave you with this final, uncompromising question to challenge your own resistance to the silent winter of indifference. When the systems around you inevitably begin to slow down and the temperature drops, will you let the engines freeze just to avoid the wear and tear? Or will you choose to pull the ignition lever, willingly accepting the exhausting, necessary friction of life? The choice is absolutely yours.